We who believe in freedom cannot rest.
So now it's my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, who I am kind of gaga about. I'm trying to keep it cool up here, but... So Mandy Manning is the 2018 Washington State Teacher of the Year and the National Teacher of the Year. She lives in Spokane with her husband and 3 children. As an English language learning educator, she is the first teacher for refugee and immigrant students at Ferris High School in the Newcomer Center. Mandy has used the opportunity of being the National Teacher of the Year to promote justice for all children, particularly for immigrants and refugees. The first opportunity came on May 2nd, 2018, when President Trump presented Mandy with her award. Mandy presented the president with signed letters from 33 of her immigrant and refugee students. Delivering the message that immigrant and refugee students and their families are focused, dedicated, treasured members of our community. This February, Mandy organized with other teachers from around the country to conduct a teach-in at the Mexico border, designed to raise awareness of the plight of immigrant children being detained at the border, to call for concrete action to protect the children. Will you please join me in welcoming Mandy Manning?
All right, we're going to see how this all works. There's lots of microphones. I feel like it's a press conference. So thank you so much, and Liz's words really resonated with me, particularly around the whole idea that the more we try, we often fail. And I sometimes feel that way. But we keep coming back. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. It's a true pleasure to be with such passionate individuals interested in social justice and human rights, and I'm excited to share the work I've been doing with Teachers Against Child Detention. As most of you know, I teach new immigrant and refugee students to our nation in the Newcomer Center at Ferris High School in Spokane. A year ago, each of my students, current and former, wrote letters, as was mentioned. There I am with the envelope, pretty basic envelope, to the president to tell him about their journeys, their dreams, and their focus on giving back to the nation that welcomed them in. And despite our hopes that this would influence the president to be more welcoming, I'm going to hold the microphone. I think it's this one, yes. It wasn't long after that trip to the White House that this administration began to separate immigrant child asylum seekers from their parents and incarcerate them, some children as young as 2 years old. It's important to note that immigrant child detention is not new with the current administration. Detaining young asylum seekers has actually been happening since the Obama administration, when we began to see a large influx of unaccompanied minors seeking a safe life in the United States. Unprepared for this rush of children, the U.S. government hastily created detention facilities to house them while they processed their asylum cases. And in response to the inhumane practice, immigrant advocates won the Flores ruling, which determined that asylum seekers should be held for no longer than 20 days. However, the Trump administration ramped up the practice by separating children from their parents and detaining them in large facilities for indefinite periods of time. This practice expanded so rapidly that the government contracted with private companies to build large tent cities to incarcerate the children. These facilities are bare bones, often with cages separating the rooms and metal bunks with inadequate bedding. Education in these facilities is woefully inadequate and does not adhere to state laws on providing a quality and appropriate education for all children, regardless of their immigration status. To top it all off, those working in these facilities are forbidden from providing even a reassuring touch to these children. And children are forbidden from comforting one another as well. So the children are denied meaningful human contact. Sorry. So teaching the population I teach, these reports are devastating, especially considering the impact on the immigrant communities throughout our nation and here in Spokane. My students and their families' fear has grown exponentially since the 2016 election. Many schools have seen a drop in attendance due to fear of immigration enforcement, even among those families with documents providing their right to be here. On a more personal level, this is my class. I have had several students in my classroom who experienced detention upon arrival in the United States. The difference being that my students went through detention under the previous administration and were held for a significantly shorter time period. And given my platform as National Teacher of the Year, I had to speak out. I know that my immigrant students and their families, people with drive and focus, only want to give back to the nation which welcomed them in. So I started to build a coalition of like-minded educators to create this organization with the aim to fight for the release of children held across the nation in detention centers simply because they were not born in the United States. On Sunday, February 17th, hundreds of educators, immigrants, and immigrant advocacy groups headed to El Paso, Texas, to hold a teach-in for freedom. Our message is that all children deserve a quality education. They have endless potential and deserve to reach that potential. And ultimately, all children deserve to be free. So in the beginning, I reached out to a small group of 2018 Teachers of the Year. Amy T. Anderson of New Jersey, she teaches sign language. Tara Bordeaux of Texas, who teaches filmmaking. And Yvonne Orozco, an English teacher from New Mexico, who is also a DACA recipient. All three jumped on board immediately, and we began to build our coalition, and there we are. The first people outside of educators that I brought on board were two indivisible organizers from the small community of Whidbey Island. They then introduced us to several other activists who had already been working on immigrant rights issues. Eventually, we were able to connect with several organizations already doing work in El Paso, including El Paso Indivisible, Hope Border Institute, and the Isleta Teachers Education Association, an affiliate of the National Education Association. I think it's important to note this coalition, that there is not just one group working on this, there are several groups. And it's important that we begin to work together in order to make change. We then began to develop a mission and a plan. Our mission at first was simple: to demand the release of immigrant children from incarceration. But over time, and as the campaign grew, we developed our official tasks. Here they are. We call on the U.S. government to end the detention and criminalization of immigrant children and their families. We call instead for the government to protect immigrant children in strict compliance with the Flores Decree. without exception for emergencies, that have allowed children to be incarcerated for extended periods. We demand that immigrant children in U.S. custody never be separated from their families. That they be held in the least restrictive settings possible and not in large institutional facilities like Homestead in Florida. And that they be released to their sponsors or their family within 20 days as required by Flores. In the end, after months of organizing, the plan was to hold a 9-hour Teach-In for Freedom in the heart of El Paso, Texas, at San Jacinto Plaza. While the Tornillo detention camp had already closed, El Paso remained an important location for our Teach-In. El Paso is a border city and has become central to the debate over immigration. It has been used by the administration as an example of a place crime-ridden, taken over by people seeking to invade our nation. But for most of us, El Paso is a modern-day Ellis Island, a shining example of peace and prosperity, a city shared by U.S.-born and immigrant citizens living and working side by side. A city which also still houses hundreds of immigrant children in smaller juvenile prisons in an estate which has incarcerated over 5,000 kids. We had to go to Texas. In the end, over 40 award-winning educators planned and delivered lessons on topics related to child detention, including the history of immigration, child detention today, the trauma that results from youth incarceration, and how to teach about immigration in the classroom and in the community. Interspersed between the lessons, we had local legislators and decision makers speak, members of the immigrant community telling their stories, music, and a powerful message from John King, Secretary of Education under President Obama. This is exactly what made the day so powerful, the work that went into planning the day. We worked closely from the start with organizations who had already been working on advocating for immigrant children and fighting for keeping families together. A few other partners were United We Dream, Teaching Tolerance, Las Americas, and Educators for Migrant Justice. We honored their work and took direction from them based on their vast experience, then stood side by side in solidarity at the event. Early in the planning process, we reached out to the 2 major educator unions. Because of this connection, many of our state affiliates sponsored teachers to attend the event. Both the National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers supported the event and participated. AFT brought several teachers from Juarez, Mexico, to tell their stories, and the NEA Hispanic Caucus also took the stage to share their personal immigration stories. Educators from across the nation taught lessons on immigration and child detention and the messages from the most impacted immigrant community members. It was an engaging day, which ended with a strong call to action to take the lessons back to our communities and classrooms, to engage our community members into action to demand the release of our children. But what made the day truly inspiring was working in collaboration with immigrant advocacy groups, education associations, and educators. There was a sense of honor and respect throughout the entire process, because it is only together that we can truly make a difference. Teachers Against Child Detention will continue to act and engage our communities until our government frees our children. This is a human rights issue. And as educators, it is our duty as mandatory reporters of abuse to speak out for all children. Children who should not be in detention, they should be in our classrooms and in our communities. I just want to mention something that's coming up this weekend. There's an organization called Moms Rising, and this Sunday there's a Mother's Day rally on behalf of immigrant mothers who are either detained with their children or separated from them on this important day. If you want more information, go to momsrising.org to see how you can participate. Thank you so much for spending time with me this afternoon. I like to end on this quote because this is really how we're going to win. Not fighting what we hate, but saving what we love. I look forward to continuing this conversation and this important work to end child detention. It's only together that we can make a difference. Thank you.